The metallic clang of a mop bucket echoed through the empty mess hall at Camp Pendleton. 2,200 hours. Most Marines were either sleeping or preparing for tomorrow's drills. But Evelyn Brennan was working as she had been for the past 15 years. 58 years old, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, shoulders hunched forward from decades of invisible weight. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her weathered face as she pushed the industrial mop across the linoleum floor. Back and forth, back and forth. The same motion she'd repeated thousands of times since becoming a janitor at this California Marine base. Nobody looked at her anymore. Nobody ever had. That was exactly how she wanted it. The mess hall stretched out before her like a cathedral of stainless steel and laminate tables. 200 feet long, 40 feet wide, capable of feeding 500 Marines at once. But at this hour, it belonged to her alone. Just Evelyn and her memories and the quiet rhythm of cleaning. She moved methodically, section by section, her thin frame barely casting a shadow. The mop handle was worn smooth from years of use. Her hands, gnarled and spotted with age, gripped it with surprising steadiness. Most people would see an old woman doing menial labor. Nobody would see what she actually was. Nobody except the people who were coming for her. Evelyn paused mid-stroke, her head tilting slightly to the left. A sound, barely audible. Footsteps approaching from the eastern entrance. Multiple sets, heavy boots on concrete. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 2,202 minutes. They were early. 7 figures pushed through the double doors, laughing and shoving each other with the casual arrogance of young warriors who'd never truly been tested. Sergeant Colt Brenner led the group, 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and swagger, fresh from a training exercise that had probably involved more posturing than actual skill development. Behind him came Corporal Ainsley Reed, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, her face twisted in that particular expression of cruelty that some people wore like makeup. Private Dalton Mercer held up his phone, already recording, because everything had to be documented these days, every moment of dominance preserved for later entertainment. Evelyn continued mopping, her movements unchanged. She'd learned long ago that the best way to survive was to be invisible, to be background noise, to be nothing. "Hey!" Colt's voice boomed across the mess hall, aggressive and entitled. "Old lady, what the hell are you doing here?" Evelyn didn't look up. She continued pushing the mop, her thin shoulders hunched even further forward, playing the role she'd perfected over 15 years. "I said, what are you doing here?" Colt strode forward, his boots leaving muddy prints across the freshly cleaned floor. Intentional. Everything young men like him did was intentional, designed to establish dominance, to remind everyone else of their place in the hierarchy. "Cleaning, sir," Evelyn said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Not from fear. She'd learned to make her voice tremble years ago, learned that vulnerability made people underestimate you, made them careless. "Just finishing up. I'll be out of your way in a moment." Ainsley Reed laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. "Finishing up? Marines are trying to eat and you're making a mess. Pathetic old hag." The others joined in their laughter, mixing with the hum of the industrial refrigerators. Dalton kept his phone up, capturing every moment, already thinking about how many views this would get when he posted it later. An old woman getting humiliated. Comedy gold. Evelyn bent down to wring out her mop in the bucket. As she did, her eyes flickered across the mess hall, cataloging details that nobody else would notice. 3 exits, 6 targets. Wind speed 11 knots from the northwest, she could feel it through the ventilation system. Structural weaknesses in the ceiling tiles at grid positions, C7 and F11. The electrical panel behind the serving counter, accessible through a maintenance corridor, most people didn't know existed. Her right hand trembled as she gripped the mop handle. But it wasn't fear causing the tremor. Her fingers twitched in a specific pattern, a rhythm she'd learned 42 years ago in a basement in Berlin. Counting, calculating, measuring angles and distances and optimal response times. 2,203 hours, she whispered so quietly that nobody else could hear. Wind 11 knots, 3 exits, 6 targets, optimal breach in 17 minutes. Colt Brenner stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "What did you just say?" Evelyn looked up, her gray eyes meeting his for just a moment. In that instant, something flickered in her gaze. Something cold and ancient and utterly without fear. But then it was gone, replaced by the watery confusion of an old woman who'd lost her train of thought. "Sorry, dear," she said, her voice returning to its tremulous quality. "Old people say strange things sometimes. My mind wanders." Colt sneered and turned back to his friends. "See, she's completely senile. Probably doesn't even remember where she is half the time." "Maybe it's time to retire, Grandma," Ainsley said, moving closer. This mess hall doesn't need trash like you. Evelyn returned to her mopping, her movements slow and deliberate. She'd been called worse. Much worse. Words didn't hurt anymore. Nothing hurt anymore, not really. She'd left the part of herself that could feel pain in Prague 27 years ago, buried under rubble and blood, and the bodies of 6 people who trusted her to bring them home. Colt grabbed the mop from her hands, yanking it away with enough force to make her stumble. She fell backward, her arms pinwheeling, playing the role perfectly. An old woman, frail and helpless, unable to maintain her balance. She hit the concrete floor hard. The impact sent a shockwave through her body, and for just a moment she was back in Prague, feeling the explosion that had torn her team apart, feeling the heat and pressure, and knowing that everything she'd worked for was ending in fire and failure. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead where she'd struck the edge of a table on the way down. Real blood, real pain. But Evelyn Brennan had learned to turn pain into fuel, learned to use every sensation as information, as data, to be processed and weaponized. She lay on the floor, food scattered around her from the bucket that had tipped over. Dirty water spreading across the linoleum. The 7 Marines stood over her, their laughter echoing off the walls. Pathetic, Colt said again. He seemed to like that word. Probably because it made him feel powerful, made him feel like he was something more than a 26-year-old sergeant who'd never seen real combat, never had to make the kind of choices that turned idealistic young soldiers into haunted old janitors. Evelyn slowly pushed herself up from the floor. 58 years old, her shoulders too thin, her gray hair coming loose from its bun, blood still dripping from her forehead, but she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she looked at Colt with those peculiar gray eyes, and for just a second, she let him see what was underneath. Not an old woman, a predator. Colt actually took a step back, some instinct warning him that he'd made a terrible mistake. But then the moment passed, and Evelyn returned to her role, bending down to pick up the scattered debris, her movements careful and slow. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'll clean this up right away. I'm so sorry." The fluorescent lights above them flickered once, twice, then died, completely plunging the mess hall into absolute darkness. In that sudden blackness, everything changed. A voice emerged from the darkness. Not Evelyn's voice. A man's voice, heavy with an Eastern European accent that spoke of frozen steppes and forgotten wars. "Good evening, Shadow 7. The voice said, each word precisely enunciated. "I've been waiting 27 years for this moment." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Colt fumbled for his phone, the small LED light casting wild, inadequate shadows across the suddenly hostile darkness. But before he could get it fully activated, a hand shot out from nowhere, pushing it down with surprising force. Evelyn's hand. But the tremor was gone. The weakness was gone. When she spoke, her voice carried no tremor at all. "Don't," she said. Just one word, but it was delivered with such absolute authority that Colt obeyed without thinking. 7 Marines and 1 ghost from Prague. The accented voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once, echoing off walls in ways that made distance impossible to judge. How fitting, how perfectly, beautifully fitting. Colt tried to take charge, tried to remember his training, tried to shout orders to his fellow Marines. But panic was already spreading through the group like a virus. Ainsley Reed screamed as footsteps echoed closer, the sound bouncing off surfaces in ways that made it impossible to tell where the threat was coming from. Dalton Mercer frantically tried his radio. Dead. His phone showed no signal. The others were calling out to each other, their voices high and afraid. All their earlier swagger evaporated in the face of something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't fight. But Evelyn wasn't panicking. In the pitch darkness, she moved with fluid precision, not bumping into a single table or chair, navigating the mess hall like she could see perfectly. Her breathing remained steady, controlled the breathing patterns she'd learned in a CIA safe house in Vienna 40 years ago. She began counting under her breath, but not in English. The words were soft, methodical, and Russian. A language she hadn't spoken aloud in over 2 decades, but one that came back to her as naturally as breathing. "Odin de Vatri." "Boot patterns," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Size 11. Weight distribution suggests tactical gear approximately 40 pounds. Spacing indicates Spetsnaz Alpha training protocol circa 1993 doctrine. 3 operators. Primary at north entrance. Secondary moving through kitchen access. Third maintaining overwatch position, probably southeast corner, elevated approximately 8 feet. In the darkness, Colt Brenner's voice cracked with fear. "How can you possibly know that?" Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his shoulder, her grip far stronger than should be possible for a 58-year-old janitor, and guided him with unexpected precision toward the southwest corner of the mess hall. "Structural pillar here," she said quietly. "Reinforced concrete, 18 inches thick. Stay low, don't move. Don't make a sound." "But, Sergeant Brenner," Evelyn said, and her voice had changed completely now, all pretense of weakness stripped away. "I am giving you a direct order. Stay low." Something in her tone made him obey. That voice carried the weight of authority earned through blood and fire, through decisions that had sent people to their deaths and kept others alive through 42 years of operating in the spaces between nations and laws and morality. The voice in the darkness laughed a cold sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Hiding won't help, Shadow. I know every corner of this place. 3 months of preparation, every camera angle memorized, every patrol route calculated. I even scheduled your precious janitor shifts." 3 months. Something shifted in Evelyn's posture, a subtle change that none of the terrified Marines could see, but would have been instantly recognizable to anyone who'd served with her in the old days. She was no longer hiding. She was hunting. 3 months, she said, her voice carrying across the darkness with perfect acoustic calculation. "I noticed unusual maintenance crew 3 months ago, workers who only came at night, who avoided eye contact, who moved with too much precision for civilian contractors. I knew you'd find me eventually, Victor." The laughter stopped abruptly. For the first time since the lights went out, uncertainty crept into the equation. "You knew?" Victor Sokolov's voice was no longer omnipresent, no longer confident. Evelyn had localized it, pinpointed his position. Northeast corner, elevated position, probably standing on one of the serving counters. "You knew I was coming." "I've been waiting too," Evelyn said simply. "Just didn't know if it would be you or one of the others. Prague wasn't going to stay buried forever." She reached up and removed her janitor's web. In the darkness, the sound of fabric tearing was followed by the soft thud of something hitting the floor. Her gray hair falling loose. Except it wasn't all gray. The wig came off, revealing shorter hair underneath darker, with only natural streaks of gray at the temples. When Colt's phone light flickered on for just a second before Evelyn swatted it away again, he caught a glimpse of her profile. The stoop was gone. The hunched shoulders straightened. The trembling hands were steady and sure. She looked like a completely different person. "Victor," she said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than a hostage situation, "you're making a mistake. This isn't Prague. These aren't CIA operatives. They're just kids." "Kids in uniform," Victor replied. "Soldiers. Fair game." "No, just kids who don't know what they're doing yet. Kids who haven't earned the weight you're trying to put on them. Like Captain Brenner was just a kid, like Alexei was just a kid." Evelyn went very still. "You want to talk about Prague, fine. Let's talk about Prague, but first let these 7 go. This is between us." "Everything is between us, Shadow. That's the point. That's what you never understood. In this world, there are no innocent bystanders. Everyone is between us." The main doors burst open. Colonel David Martinez entered with 2 military police officers, their flashlights sweeping across the darkness, trying to make sense of the situation. "What's going on here?" Martinez called out. "Why are the lights?" The takedown was swift and professional. Martinez hit the ground hard unconscious before he could finish his sentence. The MPs followed seconds later, their bodies making soft thumping sounds on the linoleum floor. But Evelyn was already moving in the darkness, tearing strips from the hem of her janitor's uniform with practiced efficiency. She knelt beside Martinez, her hands finding his pulse in the dark, checking for signs of serious injury. A concussion, definitely. Possibly a skull fracture from how his head had struck the floor. She applied pressure to specific points on his neck and head, slowing blood flow to the brain, reducing intracranial pressure techniques she'd learned from a Mossad field medic in Tel Aviv in 1987. "How do you know medical procedures?" Colt whispered, his voice barely audible. "Lucky guess," Evelyn replied, but her hands moved with the muscle memory of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Someone who had kept people alive in basements and alleyways and bombed out buildings while waiting for extraction that sometimes never came. The sound of breach charges being placed on the doors echoed through the hall, small metallic clicks that Evelyn identified immediately. "C4X," she said quietly. "Eastern Bloc variety, 4.3-second delay once triggered. He's sealing us in." Outside, Captain Luis Torres arrived with a full squad, but the doors wouldn't budge. They'd been magnetically locked from the inside with industrial-grade equipment. Through the reinforced windows, Torres could see only darkness and the occasional sweep of a tactical flashlight. Get me a breaching team, Torres barked into his radio, and someone find out why the backup power isn't kicking in. Inside the mess hall, Evelyn was guiding the 7 Marines through the darkness with uncanny precision. Her hand found the electrical panel on the wall from pure memory, fingers tracing circuits that shouldn't exist in a standard military mess hall. Circuits she'd mapped 3 months ago when she first realized someone was conducting surveillance. Kitchen freight elevator, she whispered. Old model, still runs on analog backup power. Victor wouldn't have thought to disable it. Too obvious. He'd assume we'd avoid anything that obvious. Victor, Colt asked. You know who this is? Evelyn didn't answer. She was already moving, leading them through the darkness toward the kitchen area. Colt stumbled over a chair. Evelyn's arm shot out, catching him with one hand. The grip was surprisingly strong, steady, nothing like the frail old woman who'd been mopping floors 15 minutes ago. Ainsley Reed whimpered as they moved, but Evelyn's presence seemed to calm her somehow. There was something about the way the old woman moved through the darkness, some strange authority radiating from her, even though nobody could see her face. Running to the kitchen shadow, Victor's voice taunted from somewhere in the darkness. I disabled that exit first, just like I disabled the loading dock and the emergency exits. No one gets in, no one gets out. Not until our business is concluded. In the darkness, Evelyn smiled. It was an expression no one could see, but somehow everyone felt it. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I'm not running, Victor, she said, her voice carrying across the hall with perfect acoustic calculation. I'm hunting. She tapped something against the water pipe, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code, SOS. But then the pattern became more complex, a sequence that only someone with very specific training would recognize. A ghost protocol code that hadn't been used since the Cold War ended. Throughout Camp Pendleton in a secure monitoring station, most Marines didn't even know existed. A young intelligence officer's eyes widened as the message came through the water. Main system transmitted through vibrations that their acoustic sensors picked up automatically. Ghost protocol, active, authentication code. Crimson Echo, 3 hostile operators. Priority Alpha. The intelligence officer's hands shook as he picked up a red phone that hadn't been used in 15 years. Sir, he said when someone answered, we have a ghost protocol activation. Authentication checks out. Sir, it's Shadow 7. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That's impossible, a voice said. Shadow 7 died in Prague in 1997. Yes, sir, that's what the file says. But the authentication code is valid. And whoever's transmitting it knows protocols that were retired before I was born. Another pause. Initiate full response, the voice said. I'll make the calls. Back in the mess hall, Dalton Mercer whispered urgently, that's impossible. How can you know where they are? We can't see anything. Evelyn's response was to remove her janitor's cap completely. In the darkness, the sound of fabric tearing was followed by the soft thud of something hitting the floor. When Colt's phone light flickered on for just a second, he caught a glimpse of gray hair on the ground. A wig. Underneath, Evelyn's real hair was shorter, darker, pulled back in a severe style that spoke of military precision. 2 coming from the left, Evelyn said calmly. 1 from the right. The left pair will use flashbangs. Standard Spetsnaz entry protocol for low-light hostage situations. Cover your ears and close your eyes in 3, 2, 1. The explosion of light and sound was overwhelming, but Evelyn had already positioned everyone behind cover, their faces turned away, ears protected. The flashbang detonated exactly where she'd predicted its effects, wasted on empty space. In that brief moment of illumination, they saw her clearly for the first time. The elderly stoop was gone. The trembling hands were steady. The frail grandmother had been replaced by something else entirely. Something dangerous. She moved like liquid shadow. A mop handle in her hand snapped in half with a precise strike against the wall edge, creating 2 perfectly weighted batons. Not improvised weapons. Purpose-built fighting implements created from whatever was available, a skill she'd learned from a Filipino martial artist in Manila in 1989. The first operator entered night vision goggles glowing green in the darkness. He was professional, well-trained, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Spetsnaz Alpha Group, probably the best Russia had to offer. It didn't matter. Evelyn struck with surgical precision, not at his head or body where body armor would protect him, but at specific nerve clusters in his exposed wrists and neck. Brachial plexus, radial nerve, carotid sinus. Strikes designed not to kill, but to overwhelm the nervous system, to shut down motor control without causing permanent damage. The operator dropped silently, his weapon clattering to the floor. Ainsley Reed reached for the fallen weapon instinctively. Evelyn's hand stopped her, immediately moving so fast it seemed to appear out of nowhere. Don't, she said sharply. The safety's been welded shut. It's a trap weapon. Touch the trigger and the magazine explodes. Old KGB trick designed to take out anyone who tries to use captured equipment. How could you possibly know that? Ainsley gasped. Evelyn didn't answer. She was already moving, dragging the unconscious operator into a supply closet with strength that shouldn't exist in her seemingly aged frame. She moved him with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before, positioning him in a recovery position that would prevent him from choking if he vomited while unconscious. The second operator tried to flank them, coming around through the kitchen entrance. Just as Victor had predicted, they would try to escape. But Evelyn had anticipated the anticipation. She'd positioned everyone specifically to funnel the attacker into a narrow corridor between tables, limiting his movement options, negating his tactical advantages. When he appeared, she was already there, having moved silently around the entire group while everyone else was focused on the first attacker. The encounter lasted less than 2 seconds. The operator went down with a confused expression on his face, his nervous system temporarily shut down by strikes to pressure points that few people in the world even knew existed. Outside, Sergeant James Miller had arrived with reinforcements. Miller was a 20-year veteran who'd served in Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He'd seen more combat than most Marines ever would. But as he watched through the window, observing the tactical movements illuminated by sporadic flashlight beams, something nagged at his memory. That movement pattern, he muttered to Captain Torres. I've seen it before. Bosnia, 1995. There were rumors about a ghost unit, night reconnaissance specialists who could operate in complete darkness. They said the unit commander was... He trailed off, shaking his head. Was what? Torres demanded. A woman, Miller said quietly. They said she was barely 5'6", couldn't have weighed more than 130, soaking wet. But she could move through hostile territory like smoke, like she could see in the dark. They called her Shadow 7, said she and her team saved 300 lives in one operation. But then, he paused. Operation Crimson Echo, Prague, 1997. Whole team died. All 7 operators confirmed KYA. Inside the mess hall, Viktor Sokolov's frustration was growing audible. His voice came over small speakers he'd hidden throughout the room during his 3 months of preparation. Enough games, Shadow. You think you can protect them all. You're older now, slower, and you're alone. Evelyn guided the Marines toward the kitchen, her hand trailing along the wall, reading the building like Braille. She stopped suddenly, her head tilting slightly as she sniffed the air. Gas leak, she said quietly. He's ruptured the main line. 4 minutes until the concentration reaches combustible levels. He's trying to blow us up. Colt's voice pitched higher with panic. No, Evelyn corrected, her voice maddeningly calm. He's creating a secondary threat to force us into the open. Standard Spetsnaz tactic for hostage situations. Create multiple simultaneous threats to overwhelm decision-making capability. Page 47 of their Urban Warfare Manual, if memory serves. I read it in the original Russian in 1988. Dalton stared at her in the darkness, his voice barely a whisper. Who are you? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then right now, I'm the person keeping you alive. Follow me. She led them to the walk-in freezer. The heavy door was reinforced airtight, designed to maintain temperature in power outages. It would also prevent gas from entering, at least for a while. Why should we trust you? Colt demanded, his earlier arrogance replaced with desperate confusion and lingering shame over how he'd treated her. Evelyn's voice was soft, but it carried absolute certainty. Because, Sergeant Brenner, you're still breathing. If I wanted you dead, you would have been dead 17 minutes ago. The freezer door opened with a pneumatic hiss. Evelyn ushered everyone inside, then paused at the threshold. The emergency lighting inside cast her face in harsh relief, showing features that didn't quite match what they'd seen before. Younger somehow. Harder. Thermal differential will hide our heat signatures for approximately 6 minutes, she said, calculating quickly. After that, his infrared will pick us up through the door. Then what? Ainsley asked, her earlier cruelty replaced with raw fear. Evelyn looked at her, and for the first time, something like compassion crossed her face. Then we stop hiding and start hunting. Colt watched her in the dim emergency lighting of the freezer. The way she stood, the way she moved, everything had changed. The grandmother facade had completely fallen away, revealing something else underneath, something that had been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. You're not really a janitor, are you? He said. Evelyn turned to him, and in the cold light, he could see her eyes clearly for the first time. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much done, too much lost too much. Eyes that had watched people die and made the calculations that determined who would live and who would sacrifice themselves for the mission. "I've been a janitor for 15 years, Sergeant Brenner," she said quietly. "Before that," she paused as if deciding how much to reveal. "Before that, I was something else." "Brenner," she repeated his name slowly as if tasting it, as if checking it against some internal database. "Your grandmother's maiden name was Morrison, wasn't it? Rachel Morrison, from Oklahoma." Colt nodded, confused. "How could you possibly know that?" Evelyn's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Timothy Cooper. He transferred from the 75th Rangers to a classified unit in 1993. He was—" Her voice caught slightly, the first sign of emotion she'd shown. "He was the best spotter I ever worked with. Saved my life 4 times in Bosnia. I managed to return the favor twice. We called it even." The freezer suddenly bucked as something heavy slammed against it from outside. Victor's voice was closer now, more personal, no longer coming through speakers, but through the door itself. "You killed 12 of my men in Prague, Shadow. Good men. Patriots who believed in something greater than themselves." Evelyn's voice turned to ice. "Patriots, they were trafficking children, Victor. 7 to 12 years old, sold to the highest bidder. Your patriots were monsters. They were soldiers following orders. They were predators," Evelyn shot back, "and I put them down like the rabid dogs they were." Outside the freezer, the gas concentration was rising. Through the small window in the door, Evelyn could see Viktor Sokolov himself now. He was older too, scarred. His left hand was missing the last 2 fingers, courtesy of a mistake he'd made in Chechnya in 2004. But he was still lethal. "Tell me, Shadow," Victor called out, his voice carrying that mix of rage and pain that only came from years of obsession. "Do they know about Prague? Do they know what you did to that warehouse? 43 people dead in one night." Evelyn's jaw tightened. 43 traffickers, 0 civilians. The intelligence was solid. "The records say otherwise." "The records were altered," Evelyn said, her voice carrying the weight of old betrayals, "by people who profited from the trade. People in both our governments who needed the truth buried along with my team." Dalton was typing frantically on his phone, which had suddenly regained signal. Evelyn had deliberately led them to this part of the freezer where a small repeater she'd installed 3 months ago would give them connectivity. "I'm finding something," Dalton said, his voice shaking. "Classified files. Someone with Pentagon clearance is pulling everything about Operation Crimson Echo." On his screen, fragments of documents appeared. Photos from 1997. 6 operators in night combat gear, faces obscured by tactical masks. But one figure stood out. Smaller slider but positioned at the center. The team leader. The images were labeled Ghost Team 7, Operation Crimson Echo, Status KIA, Killed in Action. All 7 operators confirmed dead. Bodies recovered and identified. "But you're here," Dalton said, looking up at Evelyn with dawning understanding. 6 bodies were recovered," Evelyn corrected, her voice flat. 6 members of my team. The 7th body they claimed was mine belonged to one of the traffickers. Similar height, similar build. The DNA test was faked by someone very high up who wanted me to disappear." "Why?" Colt asked. Evelyn met his eyes. "Because I knew too much. Because I refused certain orders. Because dead heroes can't testify before congressional committees about operations that technically never happened." The freezer door suddenly began to glow orange in one spot. Victor had brought in a thermal lance military-grade cutting equipment that could slice through the reinforced door in minutes. "We need to move," Evelyn said. "Now." "Move where?" Colt demanded. "He's got us trapped." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Your grandfather once asked me the same question. We were pinned down in a bombed-out school in Sarajevo. 32 hostiles outside, no backup, no extraction, no hope. You know what I told him?" Colt shook his head. "I told him the truth," Evelyn said. "When you can't run and you can't hide, there's only one option left." She paused, checking her watch. It was a tactical model military grade with capabilities that went far beyond telling time. "You become the nightmare they whisper about in the dark." She moved to the back of the freezer, running her hands along the wall until she found what she was looking for. A maintenance panel painted over, forgotten. Inside was the freezer's original ventilation system from before the renovation 5 years ago. The ductwork was narrow, cramped, but possible. "This leads to the loading dock," she said. "Straight crawl, 30 meters. At the end, there's a drop into the storage room. 2 meters, controlled fall. You can do this." "You want us to crawl through there?" Ainsley looked horrified. I want you to survive, Evelyn said simply. This is how you survive. One by one, she helped them into the vent, giving each precise instructions on navigation. Colt was the last to go. As he climbed in, he turned back. What about you, Bipem? I'll be right behind you, Evelyn said. Colt hesitated. That's not true, is it? Evelyn smiled, and for a moment she looked like the grandmother janitor again. Your grandfather was smarter than you. He would have already been halfway through that vent by now. He would have stayed to help you. No, Evelyn said softly. He would have followed orders, because he understood that sometimes one person has to hold the line so others can live. Go now, Sergeant. That's an order. Colt wanted to argue, wanted to stay, wanted to do something other than crawl away like a coward. But something in Evelyn's eyes told him that arguing would be the greatest disrespect he could show her. He crawled into the vent. Evelyn sealed it behind him. Then she turned to face the freezer door just as the thermal lance burst through. The metal glowed orange, then white, then began to part like curtains. Through the growing gap, she could see Victor's face, scarred and older, but still carrying the same cruel intelligence she remembered from Prague. Alone at last, Shadow, he said in Russian. Not quite, Evelyn replied in the same language, her accent flawless, despite decades without practice. You forgot about the ghosts. Ghosts, the ones who have been watching you for the last 3 months. Did you really think you were the only one planning this reunion? Doubt flickered across Victor's face. Evelyn used that moment of uncertainty. The freezer had one feature Victor hadn't considered: emergency CO2 fire suppression. She triggered it, manually flooding the area with dense white gas that obscured everything. In that chaos, she moved. Sergeant Miller, watching from outside through the window, saw it happen through a brief clearing in the gas. One moment there was only white fog and confusion. The next, Victor was on the ground, Evelyn standing over him, his own weapon in her hands. Pentagon's on the line, Torres shouted through the window. They're asking about Shadow 7. They want confirmation of identity. Miller stared through the window. In the clearing gas, he could see Evelyn's torn shirt, could see what was underneath. His blood ran cold. Tell them, he started, then stopped. Tell them, confirmed, Shadow 7 is alive. The tattoo was elaborate, beautiful, and terrible all at once. It covered most of her left shoulder and upper back, visible now through the ripped fabric of her janitor's uniform. Ghost Recon in Gothic letters curved above a detailed skull, wearing a special operations beret. Below it, Operation Crimson Echo and coordinates: 48.8176 degrees north, 15.8678 degrees east. The exact location in Prague where 6 members of Ghost Team 7 had died. 3 purple hearts were etched into the design, along with a silver star and a Distinguished Service Cross. More decorations than most generals earned in entire careers. But it was the number that made Miller's blood run cold. A simple 7 incorporated into the skull's design. Not 7th member, not Team 7. Just 7. The legendary commander of the most elite night operations unit in United States military history. Shadow 7. Outside, 4 helicopters were approaching. Not just any helicopters. Twin-rotor CH-47 Chinooks flying in formation. And on each one, visible, even at a distance, the stars that denoted the highest ranks in the American military. 4 stars on each helicopter. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Evelyn stood in the center of the mess hall as the doors were finally forced open by base security. Viktor Sokolov was on his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back. His 2 conscious operators were similarly restrained nearby. The third was still unconscious in the supply closet, but breathing steadily. Colonel Martinez was sitting up, holding his head, but alert. He took one look at Evelyn, saw the tattoo through her torn shirt, and struggled to his feet. Even injured, even confused, military protocol took over. He snapped to attention and saluted. Colonel Martinez, Camp Pendleton's security, he said formally, his voice tight with pain and awe. It's an honor, ma'am, an absolute honor. Evelyn didn't return the salute. She couldn't. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't officially military anymore. She was a janitor who'd revealed herself to be something else entirely. But she nodded with the gravity of someone who understood the weight of the gesture. The honor was mine, Colonel, she said quietly. I swore 15 years ago I was done with this life. But some oaths run deeper than retirement. The 7 Marines emerged from the storage room, having made it through the ventilation system. Colt Brenner pushed through the crowd that was forming, his face streaked with tears. Ma'am, he said, his voice breaking. What I did earlier, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Evelyn looked at him with those gray eyes that had seen too much. You couldn't have known. I made sure of that. I've been Helen Carter janitor for 15 years. Before that, I was Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Brennan, commander of Ghost Team 7. And before that, She paused, her expression distant. Before that, I was just a young woman who believed she could make a difference in the dark places of the world. The four helicopters were landing on the parade ground, now their rotors creating whirlwinds that sent loose papers flying. The stars on each aircraft were clearly visible now. General Robert Hayes, Army Chief of Staff, General Patricia Morrison, Marine Corps Commandant, Admiral James Carmichael, Chief of Naval Operations, General Michael Radford, Air Force Chief of Staff. They walked in formation across the parade ground, their aides struggling to keep pace. Every Marine on base had stopped what they were doing to watch. This wasn't just unusual, this was unprecedented. Four service chiefs didn't show up for anything less than war, or the return of a ghost. The four generals entered the mess hall like they owned it, which in a sense they did. Every Marine snapped to attention. The room fell silent except for the hum of emergency lighting that had finally kicked in, casting everything in harsh white light that made the blood on the floor look black. General Robert Hayes spoke first. He was 63 years old with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen 3 wars and countless classified operations. He looked at Evelyn like she was a ghost made flesh, which perhaps she was. "Hello, Seven," he said simply. Evelyn stood still, not at attention, but with a bearing that commanded respect nonetheless. "General, we thought you were dead." "That was the idea, sir." Hayes nodded slowly, processing this. Behind him, General Patricia Morrison stepped forward. She was the first female Marine Corps Commandant, a woman who'd broken through barriers that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Her eyes held a mixture of respect and something deeper as she looked at Evelyn. "Why activate the protocol now?" Morrison asked. "After 15 years of silence, why reveal yourself?" Evelyn gestured toward Viktor Sokolov, still on his knees. "He found me, which means others can too. And he mentioned something about Hydra, 47 embedded assets across U.S. military installations. If that intelligence is accurate, then the country needs to know." Hiding stopped being an option when he walked through those doors. Admiral James Carmichael, a career submarine officer who'd run silent operations in waters most Americans couldn't pronounce, cleared his throat. "Shadow 7, the president has been briefed. He's authorized full reinstatement if you want it. Your previous rank back, pay for 15 years full honors." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "I'm done with killing, Admiral." "I've been done since Prague." General Michael Radford, Air Force Chief of Staff, frowned. "Then what do you want?" Evelyn looked at Colt Brenner, at Ainsley Reed, at Dalton Mercer, at all the young Marines who had witnessed something extraordinary tonight, something that had shattered their understanding of the world and rebuilt it into something stranger and more dangerous. "These kids need training," she said quietly. "Real training, not just how to fight in daylight with million-dollar equipment, but how to operate when everything goes dark, when technology fails, when they're outnumbered and outgunned, and the only thing keeping them alive is training and instinct." Hayes exchanged glances with the other generals. "You want to teach? I want to make sure that the next time someone like Victor comes calling, there's more than one old janitor who can stop them." The phone in Hayes' pocket rang. Not his cell phone, but a secure satellite phone that only rang for matters of national importance. He answered it, listened for a moment, then held it out to Evelyn. "It's for you," he said. Evelyn took the phone hesitantly. "Yes." The voice on the other end was familiar, but older, rougher like gravel mixed with smoke. "Evelyn, it's been a long time." She went very still. "Colonel Holbrook." "Not Colonel anymore, kid. Just Warren now. Been retired 10 years. But I heard the ghost protocol ping. Couldn't believe it when they said it was you." There was a pause, heavy with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you in Prague." "You did," Evelyn said softly, "for 27 years. I'm 20 minutes away, already in my car. Is it him? Is it Victor?" Evelyn looked at the man on his knees, the man who'd hunted her across decades and continents. "Yes, it's Victor." "Then Prague isn't over. I'm coming." "Warren, you're 72 years old. You can't—" "I was your handler for 15 years, kid." Warren Holbrook's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I don't leave my people behind. Not ever. Stay alive. I'll be there soon." The line went dead. General Morrison looked at Evelyn with new understanding. "Colonel Warren Holbrook, Cold War legend. I didn't know you two worked together." "He recruited me in 1982, Evelyn said, her voice distant with memory. "I was 16 years old, lying about my age to join the Army. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He made me who I became." "Who you still are," Hayes corrected. Evelyn didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned to Victor. "You came here for closure, for revenge. What you got was a reminder that the past never stays buried. Now you're going to tell us everything about Hydra. Every name, every location, every operation. And if you cooperate, maybe you get to spend your life in a federal prison instead of a shallow grave in the desert. Victor looked up at her and something like respect flickered in his eyes. You always were practical, Shadow. That's what I hated most about you. No ideology, no passion, just cold calculation. Wrong, Evelyn said. I had plenty of passion. That's why 6 of my people died in Prague. I cared too much, moved too fast, didn't wait for confirmation. Passion gets people killed, Victor. I learned that lesson in blood. Before Victor could respond, Colt Brenner stepped forward, his face still showing the tracks of earlier tears. Ma'am, I need to say something. Evelyn turned to him, her expression softening slightly. Everything I did tonight, Colt continued, his voice shaking, shoving you, mocking you, treating you like, I didn't know who you were, but that doesn't matter. I should have treated you with respect regardless. I'm ashamed. I'm... Sergeant Brenner, Evelyn interrupted gently. You did what young men do when they're trying to prove themselves. You were cruel because you're afraid. Afraid you're not good enough. Afraid you don't measure up. Afraid everyone can see through you. I know that fear. I lived with it every day of my operational career. She paused, then added quietly, besides, you have your father's eyes. He had that same fear when I first met him. Took him 3 years to realize he was one of the best operators I'd ever worked with. Colt froze. My father. The mess hall doors opened again and an older man walked in. Not military bearing, but something close to it. Warren Holbrook was 72 years old with snow-white hair and a face carved by decades of secrets. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, a canvas jacket, but moved with the purposeful economy of someone who'd spent 40 years operating in hostile territory. He stopped when he saw Evelyn, really saw her, and for a moment his composure cracked. His eyes went bright with unshed tears, his jaw working as he fought for control. Jesus Christ, kid, he said, his voice rough. You're really alive. Hello, Colonel, Evelyn said, and something in her voice broke just slightly. Been a while. Holbrook crossed the distance between them in quick strides and pulled her into a hug that was equal parts relief and recrimination. For a moment, the legendary handler and the legendary operative were just 2 old friends reunited after thinking they'd never see each other again. 27 years, Holbrook said into her shoulder. 27 years I thought you were dead. I attended your memorial service. I gave your eulogy. I told everyone you were the best operative I'd ever run, and I meant every goddamn word. I know, I read the transcript. It was very moving. Holbrook pulled back his hands still on her shoulders, and everyone in the room could see real emotion on both their faces. Something that looked almost like joy mixed with grief for all the years lost. You should have contacted me, Holbrook said, his voice firmer now. I could have helped, could have protected you, could have... You couldn't, Evelyn cut him off gently. If they'd found out you knew I was alive, they'd have buried you too. Or worse, used you to draw me out. I couldn't risk that. You were the closest thing to family I had left. Holbrook's expression shifted understanding and acceptance, mixing with lingering frustration. And yet here we are. Here we are. They stood like that for a moment, handler and operative, teacher and student, 2 people connected by bonds forged in darkness and sealed with blood. Then Holbrook seemed to remember they had an audience. He straightened his professional mask, sliding back into place. General Hayes cleared his throat. Colonel Holbrook, we weren't aware you had clearance for this situation. Holbrook turned to face the generals, and despite his age and civilian status, something in his bearing made them all unconsciously straighten. There was authority in the way he stood, in the way he met their eyes, in the absolute certainty that radiated from him like heat. I ran Shadow 7 for 15 years, General. Holbrook said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of classified operations. I know more about her capabilities, her psychological profile, her decision-making process, and her operational limitations than anyone alive. If you're planning to bring her back into any capacity, you'll want me involved. Trust me on this. Morrison looked at Evelyn. Is he right? Do you want him involved? Evelyn met Holbrook's eyes, and an entire conversation happened in that glance. Questions asked and answered, doubts expressed and dismissed, trust reaffirmed. The colonel taught me everything that mattered, Evelyn said finally. Combat skills can be learned from anyone, but he taught me how to think, how to survive, how to carry the weight of command without breaking under it. If we're doing this, I want him there. Hayes studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. Then we have a proposal. Not just reinstatement, something new. The Ghost Protocol Academy. A training facility based on your methods, your tactics, your philosophy. Training operatives who can function when technology fails, when conventional approaches won't work, when the only assets available are skill and determination. Who would run it? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. You would, Hayes said simply, as director, with Colonel Holbrook as senior advisor if he's willing. Holbrook looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She gave the slightest nod, permission and request all at once. I'm willing, he said. I have conditions, Evelyn added. It's open to all branches. Women get equal consideration for selection. We focus on protective operations, saving lives, not taking them unless absolutely necessary. And I choose my first candidates. She turned to look at Colt Brenner, the young sergeant who'd shoved her, who'd called her pathetic, who was now staring at her with a mixture of shame and desperate hope. You want me? Colt's voice cracked. After what I did, your father would never forgive me if I didn't give you the chance to be better than you were tonight, Evelyn said. Besides, I meant what I said. You have his eyes. Captain Thomas Brenner could see in complete darkness once I taught him how. I suspect you inherited more than just his appearance. Colt's face went pale. You knew my father? You actually knew him. Holbrook stepped forward, his expression grave. Sergeant Brenner, your father was Captain Thomas Brenner, assigned to Ghost Team 7 in 1996. One of the finest operators I ever had the privilege to run. Smart, disciplined, completely unflappable under pressure. He died in Afghanistan, Colt said, automatically reciting the story he'd been told his entire life. Some classified operation when I was 2 years old, 1997. Not Afghanistan, Evelyn said softly. Prague, Operation Crimson Echo. The mess hall was completely silent now. Even the generals had stopped moving, sensing that something important was about to unfold. Something that might explain why this legendary operative had spent 15 years cleaning floors. Your father saved 4 of us that night. Evelyn continued, her voice steady but quiet, carrying the weight of a story she'd held inside for 27 years. We were extracting a defector, a KGB officer named Alexei Volkov, who had intelligence on Soviet sleeper cells in America. 40 cells embedded over 20 years waiting for activation orders that could come at any time. Assassinations, infrastructure sabotage, potentially thousands of civilian casualties. She paused, her eyes distant with memory, seeing Prague instead of Camp Pendleton. Victor and his team ambushed us in a warehouse near the river, old Soviet surveillance post. We should have swept it better, should have had backup position closer, should have done a dozen things differently. But we were running on tight timelines and limited resources, and we thought we'd be in and out before anyone noticed. Colt was listening with absolute focus, tears streaming down his face but making no sound. Your father was our rear security, Evelyn said. Last man and first man to see the ambush coming. He saw the grenade before anyone else did. Thrown by Victor himself, actually. Perfect throw would have killed all 7 of us and the defector. Your father, she stopped, swallowed hard, continued. He threw himself on it without hesitation, without even calling out a warning first, because that would have wasted the precious second he needed to reach it. Her voice caught slightly. I was 6 feet away. The blast threw me against a wall. When I got up, when I could see again through the dust and smoke, your father was still alive. Barely. He was conscious for maybe 30 seconds after the blast. You know what his last words were? Colt shook his head, unable to speak. Tell my son the cost of freedom is never too high, Evelyn said, her voice breaking on the last word. Those were his exact words. Not help me, not am I dying, not anything about himself. He spent his last breath thinking about you, making sure you'd understand why he'd made that choice. She moved closer to Colt, looked up at him with those gray eyes that had seen too much. I've carried those words for 27 years, Sergeant. Every time I questioned whether what we did mattered, whether the sacrifices were worth it, whether I had any right to survive when better people died, I remembered your father's face in his final words. He died believing that what we were doing was important, that protecting innocent people, even at the cost of our own lives, was the highest calling a warrior could have. Colt's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the floor, his entire body shaking with sobs he could no longer contain. Ainsley Reed knelt beside him immediately, her hand on his shoulder, her own face wet with tears. The other Marines moved closer, forming a protective circle around their sergeant, suddenly understanding that the man they'd followed into the mess hall tonight was carrying weight they'd never imagined. Holbrook's voice was gentle as he added, Your father was a hero in the truest sense, son. The intelligence we extracted that night, the information Alexei Volkov provided, it prevented 40 Soviet sleepers from activating. We're talking about assassinations of key government officials, sabotage of power grids and water treatment facilities, potentially thousands of civilian casualties. Your father's sacrifice saved more lives than we can count. Why didn't anyone tell me? Colt asked, his voice raw with pain and anger. Why did they say Afghanistan? Why did they lie? Because Prague was supposed to be a clean extraction, Evelyn said. No contact, no engagement, in and out like ghosts. When everything went wrong, when we lost 6 people, including your father, certain people in Washington decided it was better to classify the entire operation at the highest levels. They didn't want congressional oversight asking questions about why we were running black ops in post-Cold War Eastern Europe, about why we were risking American lives to extract Soviet defectors, about the intelligence networks we'd maintained after the official end of the Cold War. To protect their own asses, Holbrook added bluntly, his voice hard with old anger. They wrapped it up in national security justifications, but the truth is they didn't want to answer hard questions about operations that fell into legal gray areas. General Hayes looked uncomfortable but didn't disagree. Morrison's face showed disgust at the bureaucratic cowardice. Carmichael and Radford exchanged glances that suggested they'd heard similar stories before. Evelyn knelt down beside Colt, her movements surprisingly graceful for a 58-year-old woman who'd just been in combat. She placed one hand on his shoulder, waiting until he looked at her. Your father would want you to be angry about the lies, she said quietly. He'd want you to feel that rage, to understand that sometimes the people giving orders don't deserve the loyalty they demand. But he wouldn't want you to let that anger define you. He wouldn't want you to become bitter or cynical or cruel because of what was taken from you. How? Colt asked, his voice breaking. How do I do that? You start by showing up tomorrow at 0500, Evelyn said, and you keep showing up every day after that. You learn everything I can teach you. You honor your father's memory, not by seeking revenge or dwelling on what you lost, but by being the kind of Marine who makes the hard choices, who protects the weak, who never forgets that every life matters. That's what he'd want. That's what he died for. Ainsley spoke up, her voice small but determined. Ma'am, would you consider me for the academy? I know I don't deserve it after how I treated you tonight, but I want to learn. I want to be better. Evelyn looked at her, at this young woman who'd kicked an old janitor less than 3 hours ago and was now asking for the chance to become something more. Everyone deserves a second chance, Corporal Reed, Evelyn said. Even people who make mistakes born from insecurity and fear. You learned something tonight about real strength, about what actual power looks like. That lesson is worth building on. But understand this, if you enter my academy, I will push you harder than anyone has ever pushed you. I will break down every false assumption you have about yourself and rebuild you into something stronger. And I will never ever let you forget that cruelty is the refuge of the weak. I understand, ma'am, Ainsley said. I want that. I need that. Dalton Mercer raised his hand hesitantly like a student in class. Ma'am, I want in too. What you did tonight, the way you moved in the darkness, the way you predicted everything before it happened, it's like you turned the environment into a weapon. I want to learn how to do that. I want to understand it. Evelyn smiled slightly. Environmental awareness is the foundation of everything we'll teach private. Fear of darkness comes from ignorance. Master the environment, and darkness becomes tactical advantage rather than obstacle. One by one, the other 4 Marines from the mess hall volunteered. Within the hour, Evelyn had her first class of 7 students, each one carrying their own reasons for wanting to transform from what they'd been into what they might become. Over the next 3 hours, the mess hall transformed into an impromptu briefing room. Viktor Sokolov was transported to a secure federal facility for interrogation. The other 2 operatives were taken to the base hospital under armed guard. Colonel Martinez, despite his concussion, insisted on staying to observe the proceedings, sitting in a chair with an ice pack pressed to his head. General Hayes made the formal announcement. The Ghost Protocol Academy would be established immediately at Camp Pendleton, with plans to expand to other bases once the program proved successful. Director Evelyn Brennan, Senior Advisor Warren Holbrook. First class of candidates, the 7 Marines who'd survived the mess hall incident, with recruitment to expand based on demonstrated success in evolving requirements. The paperwork would take weeks. The bureaucracy would take months. But the training would start immediately because danger didn't wait for authorization and enemies didn't respect procurement timelines. The next morning at 0500, Evelyn stood in the empty training ground behind the mess hall. She wore simple black tactical pants and a gray t-shirt. No rank insignia. No decorations. No visible indicators of who or what she was except the way she stood, the way she held herself, the authority that radiated from her like heat from sun-baked concrete. Warren Holbrook stood off to the side, leaning against a wall with a travel mug of coffee, watching with the satisfied expression of a teacher seeing his student finally step fully into her role. Colt Brenner arrived first carrying a thermos that smelled like quality coffee, not the bitter swill from the mess hall. His eyes were red from crying and lack of sleep, but his posture was straight, his expression determined. Behind him came Ainsley Reed, moving quietly, her earlier swagger completely gone. Then Dalton Mercer, already pulling out a notebook like he planned to take notes. The other four Marines followed, each one looking nervous and uncertain and committed in equal measure. "You came," Evelyn said, simply, her voice carrying across the empty training ground. "We couldn't not come," Ainsley replied. "Not after last night, not after everything we learned." Evelyn poured herself coffee from Colt's thermos, took a sip, and nodded appreciatively. "Colombian, single origin, if I'm not mistaken. Your father had excellent taste too, Sergeant Brenner. Used to brew his own field coffee from beans he'd carry in a waterproof pouch. Said the ritual of making it properly kept him sane during long operations." Colt's eyes widened slightly. Another small detail about his father, another piece of the man he'd never known. "How do we start?" Dalton asked, his pen poised over the notebook. "Put that away," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "What I'm about to teach you can't be written down. It has to be lived, experienced, absorbed through practice until it becomes as natural as breathing." Dalton hesitated, then closed the notebook and set it aside. "We start by forgetting everything you think you know about combat," Evelyn continued. "Line up, arms length apart." They complied immediately, the casual arrogance from the previous night completely absent. "Close your eyes," Evelyn instructed. "Now tell me what you hear." Silence for a moment. Then Colt spoke. "The ocean, waves breaking on the beach maybe 2 kilometers west." "What else?" Ainsley tilted her head slightly. "Helicopters, from the airfield. 3 of them, I think, based on the rotor sounds. Maybe 3 kilometers south." "Good. What else?" Dalton's eyes snapped open. "Footsteps. Multiple people approaching from the east. At least 15, probably more, trying to move quietly, but their boots are hitting gravel." "Excellent," Evelyn said. "Open your eyes and turn around." Behind them stood 20 Marines, including Colonel Martinez with a bandage on his head, Captain Torres, and Sergeant Miller. They'd been approaching for the last 2 minutes, attempting to observe without being noticed, failing, because Evelyn's students were already learning to use their ears as primary sensors. "First principle," Evelyn said. "In the field, assume constant surveillance. Your survival depends on detecting observation before they detect your awareness. Most people rely too heavily on their eyes. But eyes can be deceived. Darkness blinds them. Camouflage confuses them. But sound is harder to mask. Movement creates vibration. Breathing creates rhythm. Hearts beat with distinctive patterns." She gestured to the watching Marines. "These people wanted to see the legendary Shadow 7 in action. But this isn't about putting on a show. This isn't about glory or recognition or proving anything to anyone. This is about creating operators who can protect others when conventional methods fail." Holbrook spoke up from his position against the wall, his voice carrying easily across the training ground despite his conversational tone. "In the Cold War, we operated behind enemy lines for weeks or months at a time. No support, no extraction guaranteed, no backup if things went wrong. We survived because we learned to become part of the environment, not dominating it, but understanding it so thoroughly that we could move through it like water through cracks." He pushed off from the wall, moving to stand beside Evelyn, and together they made an unlikely pair. The legendary operative and the legendary handler reunited after 27 years, picking up a partnership that had never really ended. "Technology changes," Holbrook continued. "Weapons evolve, tactics adapt to new threats, but the fundamentals remain constant across all eras and all conflicts. Awareness, discipline, the ability to make hard choices under pressure, the wisdom to know when to fight and when to withdraw. These are the skills that keep people alive." Over the next 2 hours, Evelyn and Holbrook led them through exercises that seemed simple but proved impossibly difficult. Standing perfectly still for 20 minutes, learning to control breathing and heart rate until they could lower their pulse to 40 beats per minute, walking heel to toe in a straight line with eyes closed, developing kinesthetic awareness of body position in space, identifying objects by sound alone, training auditory processing to extract meaningful patterns from ambient noise. "This is ridiculous," one of the watching Marines muttered from the group that had gathered. "This isn't combat training. When are they going to learn how to shoot or fight?" Evelyn heard him from 30 feet away, demonstrating the very skills she was teaching. "What's your name, Marine?" The man straightened, realizing she'd heard him. "Corporal James Mitchell, ma'am." "You're right, Corporal Mitchell. This isn't combat training. Combat lasts seconds or minutes. What I'm teaching is survival training. Survival lasts a lifetime. Which would you rather master how to shoot better or how you pay to avoid being shot in the first place? Mitchell hesitated. Both, ma'am. Eventually, yes. But we start with fundamentals. A weapon is useless if you don't know when to use it. Strength means nothing if you're striking at shadows. Speed is worthless if you're running in the wrong direction. So we begin by teaching you to observe, to orient yourself properly, to decide based on accurate information, and only then to act. Boyd's OODA loop, but applied at a deeper level than most military training considers. She paused, then added, "You're dismissed, Corporal. But if you're interested in learning rather than just watching, you can report here tomorrow at 0500. We can always use more students." Mitchell exchanged glances with several other watching Marines. "Permission to join now, ma'am." "Denied tomorrow. If you're serious about this, you'll show up. If not, no harm done." By 0700, word had spread across Camp Pendleton like wildfire. Shadow 7 was real. The legend was alive. She'd spent 15 years cleaning their floors, and now she was building an academy that would transform special operations training. The training ground was surrounded by off-duty Marines, all wanting to witness history being made. Evelyn ignored them, focusing entirely on her 7 students. They were exhausted, frustrated, and beginning to understand that what they'd signed up for was going to be far more difficult than anything they'd imagined. "Reed," Evelyn called out, "you kicked me last night when I was down. Tell me why." Ainsley's face flushed red. "Because I could, ma'am. Because it made me feel powerful." "And what have you learned since then?" "That real power is choosing not to hurt someone when you can close," Evelyn said, "but not quite right. Real power is understanding the difference between strength and cruelty, between dominance and leadership, between making yourself feel big and actually being capable. You kicked me to feel powerful because, deep down, you felt powerless. That kick told me you were positioned at my 4 o'clock weight, distributed 70-30 on your left foot, favoring your right knee, the one you injured in basic training, but never reported because you were afraid it would make you seem weak." Ainsley's eyes widened in shock. "How could you possibly know about my knee? You've been compensating for 3 years. I've watched you walk through the mess hall hundreds of times. The limp is barely perceptible, but it's there. Last night, that knowledge could have let me disable you permanently with one strike to that weak knee. Instead, I chose to protect you despite your cruelty. That's the difference between having power and using it wisely." She turned to Colt. "You shoved an old woman because she was in your way. What does that make you?" "Well, a coward, ma'am," Colt said immediately. "No, it makes you someone who acted on incomplete intelligence. In combat, that gets people killed. Your father never acted without complete information, even if it meant waiting in uncomfortable positions for days." Bosnia, January 1994. Minus 20 degrees Celsius. "We had to target a Serbian commander coordinating ethnic cleansing operations. Your father had a clean shot after 12 hours. Perfect conditions, no wind target isolated." Colt listened with absolute focus, hungry for any details about the father he'd never known. "But something felt wrong to him," Evelyn continued. "He couldn't articulate what, just a sense that the situation wasn't what it appeared to be. So we waited and waited. 60 hours into the operation, in the middle of the night, 6 children arrived unexpectedly. The target's own children, visiting from a supposedly safe location. If your father had taken that early shot, 6 kids would have been orphaned. Instead, we waited another 12 hours until the target was isolated again. The operation succeeded, the children were spared, and your father taught me one of the most important lessons of my career." "What lesson?" Colt asked quietly. "That patience is a weapon as valuable as any rifle. That the cost of success matters as much as success itself. That we can accomplish our missions without becoming the monsters we're fighting against." The training continued. Holbrook interjected occasionally with strategic wisdom, with lessons learned from 40 years of running covert operations in the world's darkest corners. The dynamic between him and Evelyn was clear to everyone watching. She was the operator who'd lived in the field. He was the strategist who'd seen the larger patterns. She taught tactics, he taught thinking. Together they created something greater than the sum of their parts. At 0900, an alarm sounded across the base. Not a drill, an actual security breach. North perimeter, single individual who'd avoided all sensors until the final fence, demonstrating exactly the kind of skills Evelyn had just been teaching. Colonel Martinez's radio crackled. "Colonel, we have a breach. Subject is elderly male, 70s. He's not resisting, but he's also not surrendering. Just standing there with his hands visible, waiting. Sir, he's asking for Shadow 7 by name." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but Holbrook stiffened slightly beside her. They exchanged a glance, an entire conversation happening in that moment. How old exactly? Evelyn asked. Early to mid-70s, ma'am. Moves like someone with extensive training. Security's recommending we treat him as hostile until identity is confirmed. Let him approach, Evelyn said. But keep weapons ready. He's dangerous, but not necessarily hostile. There's a difference. Ma'am, protocol requires... I'm aware of protocol, Colonel. I'm also aware that this particular individual could kill everyone between him and this location before they even realize he was a threat. Let him come. My students need to see what they're training to become. 10 minutes later, a figure emerged from the morning mist that was still burning off under the California sun. Mikhail Sokolov was 74 years old, but moved like a man 20 years younger. Tall, lean, scarred with eyes the color of winter ice. He wore civilian clothes, work pants, a plain shirt, boots that had seen serious use, but carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime operating in hostile territory. He stopped exactly 20 meters from Evelyn, a distance that was tactically significant, close enough to communicate normally, far enough to react if violence erupted. His hands remained visible and empty, but everyone watching understood that his hands were weapons in themselves. Hello, little ghost, he said in heavily accented English, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Hello, old wolf, Evelyn replied, her voice calm but with an edge of wariness. The Marine's tensed hands moving toward weapons. Holbrook stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Evelyn and the potential threat, his body language is shifting into something more dangerous despite his 72 years. Mikhail Sokolov, Holbrook said, his voice hard. KGB, I chased you through Berlin in '87. You were running an asset in the West German government, a secretary with access to NATO briefings. Mikhail's weathered face creased into a slight smile. And you almost caught me at Checkpoint Charlie. Very close, Warren Holbrook. Very close indeed. You were good. Not good enough, apparently. No one was good enough in those days. That was the game we played. That was how we stayed alive. Mikhail's expression sobered, the smile fading. But those days are gone. The wall has fallen. The Soviet Union is memory. And my brother Victor, he cannot let go of past. He is broken. Afghanistan broke many of us. Prague broke him completely. Then why are you here? Evelyn asked, her voice carrying no hostility, but no welcome either. Mikhail met her eyes directly. Because I trained him. I made him into weapon he became. Now I must help unmake what I created. This is my responsibility, my burden to carry. He looked at Holbrook, then back to Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted. Not pleading, but something like resignation mixed with determination. We are old now, all of us, Mikhail continued. Time for different war. Not East versus West, not ideology versus ideology. Time for war against darkness itself, against people like my brother who cannot see past their own pain and rage. Holbrook and Mikhail sized each other up, two Cold War veterans who'd spent decades as enemies, now standing on the same ground with what might become a common purpose. The tension was palpable, everyone watching and waiting to see how this would resolve. You were KGB, Holbrook said flatly. You ran an operations against American interests for 40 years. You tried to kill people I cared about. Why should we trust you now? You should not, Mikhail said simply. Trust is earned, not given. I offer only this chance to prove myself. Chance to teach what I know. Chance to turn lifetime of darkness toward light. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, weighing options and risks with the analytical precision that had kept her alive for 4 decades. Can you track? Mikhail's eyebrows rose slightly. Can I track little ghost? I could track mouse across frozen tundra and blizzard. I could follow man through city of million people without being seen. I could read signs in dirt that tell story of everyone who passed through days ago. Yes, I can track. Prove it, Evelyn said. 7 Marines, 30-minute head start. Anywhere on base. If even one evades you for 3 hours, you walk away and never contact me again. If you catch them all, we talk about what happens next. And when I catch them all, Mikhail asked, not if, but when. Then we discuss whether someone who spent 60 years being the predator can learn to become the guardian instead. Mikhail considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed, but I choose conditions. No vehicles, no outside help, no technology. I track old school the way I learned in Siberia when I was boy, learning from my grandfather. Evelyn looked at her 7 students, at these young Marines who'd volunteered less than 12 hours ago and were already being thrown into situations that would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. You heard him, she said. 30 minutes. Beginning now. Use everything you've learned. Use everything you know about this base. Use your training, your instincts, your fear. Run. They scattered immediately, each heading in different directions. Colt went toward the vehicle depot. Ainsley disappeared into the maze of barracks buildings. Dalton vanished into the administrative complex. The others split up, using their years of familiarity with Camp Pendleton to find hiding places they hoped would work. Mikhail watched them go with professional interest, his eyes tracking movement patterns, noting preferred directions, calculating pursuit strategies. "The technical one will try to use security cameras to monitor my position," he said conversationally. "The woman will blend with other female Marines in barracks. The angry young man with father's eyes, he will try to think like operator. Others will simply hide and hope to be overlooked." "Maybe," Evelyn said noncommittally, "or maybe they'll surprise us both." "Children do not surprise me anymore," Mikhail said. "I have hunted too many over too many years." "These aren't children," Holbrook interjected. "They're Marines who faced death last night and showed up to train this morning, despite having every reason to run away. That makes them extraordinary whether you recognize it or not." For the next 30 minutes, Evelyn, Holbrook, and Mikhail stood in an increasingly uncomfortable silence, while the generals and gathered Marines watched nervously. The two Americans and the Russian, three old warriors from three different eras, waiting to see how this strange test would unfold. At exactly 0930, Mikhail began to move. He didn't run or rush. He simply walked to where Dalton had disappeared, knelt at the entrance to the administrative building, and examined the ground with fingers that moved with surprising delicacy despite their gnarled appearance. "Technical specialists tried to double back 3 times to confuse trail," he said, speaking to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone watching. "Smart thinking. But he steps heavier on right foot when concentrating, makes pattern distinctive even through attempted misdirection." He followed Dalton's trail with uncanny precision, moving through the administrative building like he'd studied its layout for months. Within 40 minutes, he found Dalton hidden in a server room, wedged behind equipment racks in a space that seemed too small for a grown man. "First catch," Mikhail announced over the radio Evelyn had given him. 6 remain. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in tracking and human behavior analysis. Mikhail found 4 more Marines with methodical efficiency that bordered on supernatural. He explained each capture in detail, pointing out the tells and mistakes that had given them away. A disturbed spiderweb here, barely visible but indicating recent passage. A partial boot print in dust there, showing size and weight distribution and direction of travel. The way condensation had been wiped from a window, indicating someone had looked out recently. Each clue invisible to the untrained eye, but obvious to someone who'd spent 60 years reading signs that others couldn't see. But 2 remained hidden: Colt and Ainsley, the sergeant and the corporal, the bully, and the mean girl, somehow proving more capable than their more experienced squad mates. "Interesting," Mikhail admitted as the 3rd hour approached, his tone carrying genuine respect. "The two with most to prove showing most capability. This is good sign. Shame can be powerful motivator if channeled correctly." "Or they're just better learners," Evelyn said. "Not everything comes down to motivation. Sometimes people simply have aptitude." With 10 minutes remaining in the 3-hour deadline, Mikhail stood in the center of the base, eyes closed, listening to sounds that most people couldn't hear. His head tilted slightly, tracking some acoustic signature that gave him information the rest of them were missing. "The woman is in mess hall," he said finally, "hiding where this all began. Poetic choice, but predictable once I consider her psychology. She seeks closure, resolution, return to scene of transformation." He found Ainsley in the walk-in freezer where Evelyn had hidden them the previous night. She emerged shivering, but with her head high, proud to have lasted as long as she had. 5 minutes left. 1 Marine still hidden. The watching crowd had grown to over 100 now, word having spread that something extraordinary was happening. Mikhail's expression grew more focused, almost meditative. This was professional pride, now the need to prove himself against an adversary who was proving more capable than expected. He moved with renewed purpose, checking every location a person could hide within range of his starting point. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. The alarm sounded. 3 hours exactly. Colt Brenner had evaded the greatest tracker in Russian intelligence history. "Impossible," Mikhail muttered in Russian, then louder in English. "Show yourself, young Brenner. You have won fairly. Come out so I can learn how you defeated me." Colt emerged from an unexpected location. He'd been standing among the watching Marines for the past 2 hours. He'd grabbed a different uniform shirt from a laundry building, changed his posture and bearing, and simply blended into the crowd of spectators. He'd been there the entire time, watching Mikhail work, hiding in plain sight, where no one would think to look. Evelyn's voice was quiet but carried clearly. Your father's trick. Captain Brenner always said the best hiding place was where everyone could see you but no one would look. Called it tactical invisibility through normalization. Mikhail stared at Colt with something approaching awe. You did not run. You did not hide. You became background, part of environment, unremarkable observer. This is, he paused, searching for words. This is very sophisticated thinking. Very dangerous thinking. This is thinking that keeps people alive when everything else fails. He turned to Evelyn, and for the first time since he'd arrived his expression showed genuine respect rather than professional courtesy. One evaded me, he said formally. By our agreement, I walk away. Or, Evelyn said slowly, you stay and teach. Help us build something better than what we were. Help us train operators who protect instead of destroy. Help us give meaning to all those years of hunting and being hunted. Mikhail was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he processed this offer. Then he pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number. He spoke rapid Russian, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, then switched to English clearly for Evelyn's benefit. This is Volkov. Contract terminated. Shadow 7 is dead, has been dead for 27 years. I found only janitor playing soldier with children. Not worth my time. Not worth anyone's time. Recommend closing file permanently. He hung up and tossed the phone into a nearby trash can, a gesture of finality that everyone understood. I assume instructor positions come with room and board, he asked. Evelyn smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time since the mess hall incident. Welcome to Ghost Protocol Academy, Instructor Sokolov. The gathered Marines erupted in surprise and confusion and excited speculation. General Hayes stepped forward, his expression concerned. Director Brennan, we can't just hire a Russian operative. There are protocols, security clearances, background investigations. Former Russian operative, Mikhail corrected his English, improving noticeably now that he wasn't maintaining the operational distance. I defected moment. I threw that phone away. Old loyalties are dead. Old wars are over. Only question now is whether I can be useful in new war against darkness. He's right, Holbrook said, moving to stand beside Evelyn. We need him. How many of your current instructors have successfully tracked targets through Siberian wilderness? How many have run operations in 50 different countries under 30 different identities? How many have made every mistake that can be made in this line of work and survived long enough to learn from them? General Morrison looked skeptical. This is highly irregular. The security implications alone. So is a janitor who's really the most legendary operative in CIA history, Evelyn pointed out calmly. The academy isn't about being regular or following standard procedures. It's about being effective, about teaching skills that keep people alive, about creating operators who can function when everything else fails. Mikhail Sokolov can teach things that no American instructor can teach because he learned them from a completely different tradition with completely different assumptions about what's possible. Hayes looked at Holbrook. Colonel, you're the senior advisor. What's your assessment? Holbrook met his eyes steadily. If this was purely about security, I'd say no. If this was about politics or optics or bureaucratic cleanliness, I'd say absolutely not. But this is about effectiveness, about creating the best possible training program. And for that, we need Mikhail Sokolov. I'll stake my reputation on it. After a long moment, Hayes nodded slowly. Conditional approval. He's monitored, restricted to base except for official business, and if there's even a hint of compromise, he's gone. Understood. Understood. Evelyn said. Understood. Mikhail agreed. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to take shape. The Ghost Protocol Academy evolved from concept to reality, from theory to practice, from 3 aging warriors with complementary skills to something that resembled an actual institution. Evelyn led tactical training, teaching movement in darkness, acoustic, targeting, environmental awareness, non-lethal combat, all the skills she'd learned over 40 years of operating in hostile territory. Holbrook taught strategic thinking, mission planning, intelligence analysis, risk assessment, all the cognitive skills that separated operators who survived from operators who didn't. Mikhail taught tracking, evasion, psychological warfare, interrogation, resistance, all the dark arts he'd mastered serving the Soviet Union. Together, they created a curriculum that spanned 3 different military traditions, 3 different operational philosophies, 3 different approaches to the fundamental problem of how to accomplish missions while minimizing casualties and maintaining moral clarity. The first official class started with 28 volunteers from all service branches. Evelyn's original 7 became squad leaders, having learned more in one night of terror than most learned in years of conventional training. Colt Brenner proved exceptionally adept at night operations, his natural athleticism combined with what seemed to be genuine genetic gifts for low-light vision. But more importantly, his transformation from casual bully to thoughtful protector became the model that others followed. He spent extra hours with newer students, especially those who exhibited the same kind of arrogance he'd shown before his fathers. Truth had broken him open and remade him into something better. Ainsley Reed discovered remarkable talent for acoustic analysis. She could identify individuals by breathing patterns, by heartbeat rhythms, by the subtle sounds bodies made simply by existing. She developed a training module called Acoustic Signature Recognition that would eventually become standard curriculum across multiple agencies. Dalton Mercer created innovative hybrid approaches that combine traditional tracking with modern technology, not replacing human skills, but enhancing them using tools to amplify capability rather than substitute for it. His work would revolutionize how intelligence services thought about surveillance and counter-surveillance. But it was the dynamic between the three instructors that proved most transformative. They represented not just three different skill sets, but three different philosophies about what it meant to serve to protect, to operate in moral gray areas, while maintaining some core of ethical clarity. Evelyn was the idealist who'd been forged in darkness, who'd lost everything believing in something greater than herself, and somehow emerged still believing, despite all evidence, that belief was foolish. Holbrook was the pragmatist who'd sent hundreds of people into danger, who'd made calculations about acceptable losses, and lived with those choices, who understood that sometimes the best you could do was terrible, but still better than the alternatives. Mikhail was the redemptionist who'd spent 60 years serving darkness and finally found his way to something like light, who carried his past like chains, but refused to let that past define his future. Together, they taught not just tactics, but wisdom. Not just how to fight, but when to fight, and why to fight, and what to fight for. Not just how to survive darkness, but how to emerge from darkness without becoming dark yourself. 3 months into the academy's operation, an unexpected visitor arrived. A woman in her late 30s with a teenage girl beside her, both carrying themselves with the particular wariness of people who'd learned not to trust easily. Anna Volkov found Evelyn in the training ground, supervising an exercise where students were learning to navigate obstacle courses in complete darkness while maintaining tactical awareness of surrounding threats. "Excuse me," Anna said. "I'm looking for instructor Sokolov, Mikhail Sokolov." Evelyn turned and recognition dawned immediately. "Anna, from Sarajevo? You were 9 years old." Anna's eyes widened. "Shadow 7, I heard rumors, but I didn't think they were true. That you were alive. That you were here. I'm not Shadow 7 anymore. Just Evelyn now." She gestured at the training ground. "And yes, Mikhail is teaching here. Is it true what they say about him, that he changed sides, that he's trying to make amends?" "It's true, he's been here for 3 months. Evelyn paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's trying. Whether that's enough, whether redemption is even possible after 60 years of doing what he did, I don't know. But he's trying." The teenage girl stepped forward, and Evelyn saw steel in her eyes that went beyond normal adolescent determination. "I'm Helena Volkov. I want to apply for the academy." "You're too young. Minimum age is 18. "You were 17 when you lied about your age to join the army," Helena countered. "I've researched everything about you. Every article, every rumor, every leaked document about Shadow 7 and Ghost Team 7 and Operation Crimson Echo. I've been preparing my entire life for this." Before Evelyn could respond, Mikhail appeared from around a building, moving silently despite his age. When he saw Anna, his weathered face transformed. Emotion broke through the professional mask he usually wore, and for a moment he was just an old man, seeing his niece for the first time in decades. "Anushka," he said softly, using the Russian diminutive, "I thought I would never see you again. Thought you would never want to see me after everything I did, everything I represented." They embraced, and everyone nearby tactfully looked away, giving them space for a reunion that clearly carried weight none of them fully understood. When they separated, Mikhail looked at Helena with undisguised interest and what might have been pride. "She has your mother's eyes, your grandmother's cheekbones, but the way she stands, the way she observes before speaking, that is pure Volkov." Helena stepped forward, meeting her great-uncle's eyes directly. "I want to train here. I want to learn what you know. I want to be good at this." Mikhail looked at Evelyn, a question in his expression. She studied Helena for a long moment, seeing determination mixed with anger, mixed with something else, something that looked like a need to prove herself against impossible standards. "Show me what you already know," Evelyn said finally. For the next hour, Helena demonstrated skills that put many of the Marine students to shame. Tracking techniques that showed systematic training, evasion tactics that indicated serious practice, acoustic awareness exercises that suggested someone had taught her specifically how to use sound as a tactical tool, even basic pressure point strikes and defensive combinations that, while not perfect, showed legitimate foundation. Who taught you? Evelyn asked when the demonstration concluded. My mother mostly, Helena replied. She learned from resistance fighters in Sarajevo when she was young. Survival skills, basic combat, how to hide, how to move through hostile territory. And I've been studying everything I could find about military training, special operations tactics, everything. 3 months, Evelyn decided. You train with the Marines for 3 months. No special treatment, no allowances for age or gender or any other factor. If you keep up, if you prove you can handle the curriculum, you can formally enter the academy on your 18th birthday. But understand this, what we teach here can save lives or take lives. The difference is in how you choose to use it. Helena's face lit up with fierce joy. I won't disappoint you. Don't worry about disappointing me, Evelyn said. Worry about disappointing yourself. That's the only opinion that ultimately matters. As Helena walked away with Anna to begin processing paperwork, Holbrook moved to stand beside Evelyn. She reminds you of someone, he said quietly. She reminds me of me, Evelyn admitted. Same determination, same willingness to do whatever it takes. She paused, same potential to become something dangerous if not properly guided. Then guide her properly. That's why we're building this, isn't it? So the next generation doesn't have to learn everything the hard way. So they can benefit from our mistakes without having to make all the same mistakes themselves. Evelyn nodded slowly. Sometimes I wonder if we're creating something good or just perpetuating the cycle in a different form. We're creating choice, Holbrook said firmly. That's all we can do. Give them the skills, give them the wisdom, give them the ethical framework, and then trust them to make their own decisions. Some will choose violence, some will choose protection. But at least they'll have the choice, and they'll have examples of both paths to help them decide. Mikhail joined them, watching Helena disappear into the administrative building. My niece, she carries much anger, much need to prove herself. This can be dangerous. It can also be powerful if channeled correctly, Evelyn said. Your brother chose revenge. You chose redemption. Let's make sure Helena chooses protection. That's the whole point of what we're building here. 6 months into the Academy's operation, the first class was ready to graduate. 28 students had become 26. 2 had voluntarily withdrawn, recognizing that this path wasn't for them. No shame in that. Better to recognize your limitations before people's lives depended on you. The graduation ceremony was simple, held at dawn in the same training ground where everything had started. No families invited, no press coverage, no official recognition. Just the graduates, the instructors, and the knowledge that something significant had been accomplished. Evelyn stood before them, these 26 warriors who transformed themselves over 6 months of the most demanding training any of them had experienced. You came here for different reasons, she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. Some of you came for glory. Some came to prove something to yourselves or others. Some came because you saw something in what we were building and wanted to be part of it. Whatever brought you here, what matters now is what you take forward. She paused, looking at each face, seeing the transformation that had occurred. You are not special forces in the traditional sense. You won't have fancy equipment or unlimited budgets or political backing when things go wrong. What you have is training, skills, the ability to operate when technology fails, when support is unavailable, when the only asset you can rely on is yourself and the person beside you. Holbrook stepped forward. You're also not alone. Every graduate of this academy is connected to every other graduate, a network of people who understand what you've learned, who share your values, who will support you when operations go sideways and the official structures can't or won't help. That network is your real strength. Mikhail added, his voice, his accent thicker with emotion. You have learned to walk in darkness without becoming dark. This is a rare gift. Most people who learn these skills, they lose something of humanity in process. They become hard-cold, disconnected from people they protect. You must resist this, must stay human even while doing inhuman things. This is burden you carry now. The graduates received no diplomas, no certificates, no physical evidence. They'd completed this training. Just a quiet handshake from each instructor and the understanding that they were now part of something larger than themselves. As the ceremony concluded and students prepared to return to their units, Colt Brenner approached Evelyn one last time. Ma'am, I just wanted to say, everything you taught me about my father, about what it means to serve, about making hard choices. I'm going to carry that with me. I'm going to try to be worthy of what he sacrificed. Evelyn looked at him, this young man who'd come so far from the bully who'd shoved an old janitor 6 months ago. You already are worthy, Colt. The moment you chose to be better than you were, you became worthy. Your father would be proud. Not because you're a perfect warrior, but because you're a thoughtful one. That matters more than any tactical skill. As Colt walked away, Evelyn felt Holbrook's hand on her shoulder. You did it, kid. You built something that's going to outlast us all. And we did it, she corrected. You, me, Mikhail, all three of us, and these 26 graduates, and the next class starting tomorrow. It's never about one person. That's the whole lesson. Holbrook smiled, finally learning after all these years. Better late than never.